Good morning all, I can confirm that we are now live.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our public board meeting for Herefordshire and Worcestershire's Integrated Care Board. I do want to take this opportunity to just wish members of the public and indeed our members here a healthy and happy year ahead for 2025. I do appreciate also that this is a particularly challenging time of year for many people. Particularly, we know that our staff are under enormous pressure. I just wanted to thank all the colleagues who've worked over Christmas and continue to put, I know, very strong efforts to maintain our health and care services throughout our Herefordshire and Worcestershire. So thank you to everybody. In terms of apologies for absence, we have received none, so I'm hoping all colleagues will be present today, although at the moment I think we haven't got our local authority colleagues with us. Declarations of interest, just check with you if anyone would needs to declare anything. Obviously we've got our register of interest available to members of the public to view, but just in case there's anything on the agenda today that people would like to make a particular note for, there is an opportunity to do that now. I can confirm we're quorate, so we're able to proceed. So without any further ado, I'll just move on to the next item, item 4 then, which is our governance log, including our board forward plan. I note there are no actions due, Hannah, so is there anything that you particularly wanted to mention, or is just for noting at this stage?
Yeah.
Are there any questions around anything in the governance log, and particularly in relation to outstanding actions? Obviously, a key point there, as I think we're still waiting for the planning guidance, which is linked to a couple of the actions on the log. Minutes of our previous meeting on the 20th of November are there for approval. Can I take it that colleagues are happy to approve that? Obviously, if there are any points of accuracy, please do comment. Otherwise, I'll take it as read that you are happy to approve. So on that basis, we move on to our substantial items on our agenda. We do have a question from the public today. So I'll take the opportunity just to read that, and I believe Will Taylor will be responding to that. So the question was, why has equal access to IVF for same-sex female couples and single women not been implemented in Herefordshire and Worcestershire as in other ICBs, and when will it be implemented? So Will, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the member of the public for raising this question. So the ICB is aware and has reviewed the ambitions of the Women's Health Strategy for England, which was published in 2022. This is a 10-year strategy and outlines actions aimed at the government alongside other relevant organisations, including NHS England and NICE, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and is planned to be facilitated with a delivery plan. So in relation to NHS funded fertility services, the Hereford and Worcestershire policy is based on the NICE clinical guidance CG 156, fertility problems, assessment and treatment, which describes the best practice for the NHS. A review of this NICE guidance is in progress, and the NICE website suggests that the provisional schedule for draft consultation by the end of March 2025, with an expected publication date later that year, or this year now actually. Yeah. In the meantime, the ICB has commenced a review of the current policy, working with local and specialist providers to ensure that it remains fair and equitable to all patients. This work will be further informed by the updated NICE guidance when it comes out as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will, and thank you to the member of the public who asked the question. We do encourage people to use that facility, and obviously we'll answer as many questions as we can during the course of these kinds of meetings in the future. So we move on then to our patient story, and today our patient story, I believe, is being shared by Roy Williams. So Roy, over to you, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I'll be reading out the patient story today as the one of the digital clinical leads within the system. I'm a GP, and we've sought a story which hopefully showcases how using digital and data tools has helped to improve the lives of patients in our system. So the patient story is about George, who's an 89-year-old gentleman who lives alone in a relatively rural area of our county. And the primary care network that his GP practice is part of is working on trying to improve the identification of frailty in their population using a validated scoring called the Rockwood score for their older residents. And the primary care network, or PCN, ran a series of data searches in the clinical system to try to identify elderly patients who didn't have a Rockwood score and hadn't had a consultation within the clinician in the practice over the past 12 months. And George is one of the patients that was identified on that report. And we then used the shared care record, which gives a view of other systems. And it was apparent that George also didn't seem to have any input from social care or the neighbourhood teams. So using that information, our PCN frailty care coordinator contacted George and identified that he had some care needs, and arranged for a visit for our frailty nurse to see him to complete a comprehensive geriatric assessment and a discussion about his future care planning. And when they visited George, they identified that he was living alone, having lost his wife 2 years before, and really had very limited social interaction, no local family, and some financial worries and some health concerns. And he hadn't contacted GP practice as he didn't want to bother them, but the frailty team were able to arrange a GP appointment where George was able to manage his health issues. And the frailty nurse went back at a later date and completed an advanced care planning assessment to really document George's wishes for the future. And that information and the assessment was all entered into the GP digital system, which would then be accessible to other organisations across the health and care system by the shared care record. He was also referred to the primary care network social prescribing team, who visited him and discussed local support groups, including, and he was referred to a befriending service through one of the local voluntary services, and also linked him into the citizens advice team, who supported him to ensure he was accessing the right benefits. And as part of that, he was also referred to the Warmth on Prescriptions scheme locally. And George now attends a regular session at one of the voluntary care run day centres, and he's now confident about contacting GP practice in the future. And we've got his care needs sort of documented for the future. So this story hopefully illustrates how using tools and data at our disposal allows clinicians to provide proactive and preventative care, which in turn helps our residents to stay healthier and happier for longer without the need for secondary care intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. A really good illustration, I think, of how actually I think that the availability of sort of shared data helps us all offer much more joined up services, actually, in a very simple way. Are there any questions or other comments that colleagues would like to make? Jane, please.
Yeah, thanks, Roy, for that. One of the things that often worries me is about universal services versus targeted services. So, you know, all 75 over 75 are supposed to have an annual check with their GP, and I wonder, and I'm keen to understand from you, Will, Nigel, your view about how much of that is work that isn't really required, and we use a lot of GP resource doing those checks, when actually we might be better targeting that limited resource in the way that you're suggesting. I think there's a real challenge around getting the balance of that right.
Roy or Nigel or Will, would you like to come in on that?
I can come back on that. Yeah, I think there's certainly the problem is lots of our over 75s are obviously engaging with us very well, and they have come for their regular review. So I think you're right that the effort is much better placed in this sort of work, trying to pick up the patients who actually have much greater need. And I think sometimes the over 75 reviewed can become, you know, a tick box that actually benefits a few, but it's really a much better approach to really use the data to identify the people with the greatest need. So I know the public health team have done some work around our IMD populations and the rate of emergency admissions in that population. So again, we're really focusing our efforts in the deprived areas as well, who tend not to sort of attend for those sort of health checks despite being invited. So I absolutely agree. I think that's a much better use of our limited resource to do that focused work.
Thanks very much, Roy. Nigel, and then Will.
Yeah, I agree with Jane. I think, and what Roy has been saying, unsurprisingly, actually targeting those who are in greatest need is actually the way forward for this. I think in a lot of areas, and I think we are doing a lot of work in this area. So you know, our work through our outreach teams has repurposed some of the health checks resource to look at those who are most in need of that, rather than just making it a one-size-fits-all, because then you're at risk of actually widening health inequalities rather than really focusing in on those who have the absolute need. So I think we are making steps in this direction, but I think very sensible to bring up. I think this needs to be, when we look at contracts, I think we need to make sure that there is this angle about actually targeting them onto those who have the most need is actually really important.
Thank you, Nigel. Will?
So there's some really interesting work going on in this space as well around segmentation of patients. Frimley have done a big piece of work around using combined data sets, and this comes back into the digital piece, from both primary and secondary care, to segment their patient population into 11 people, ranging from sort of the very simple people who have got huge amounts of need to people who have huge amounts of complexity, need, and vulnerability. And then they're using that to target the resources both in primary care and now secondary care, and the outcomes have been superb. And I know we, as part of our neighbourhood working piece as a system, are now looking at that kind of concept and how we can implement it into the integrated neighbourhood working teams and primary care, because I think it's probably going to be one of the next big things we see in the NHS, and how we really personalise and target resource properly. But it does rely on us combining our data sets and using those really, really well and cleverly.
Yeah, thank you, Will. And Sarah?
So first of all, really lovely to hear that kind of discussion about, I suppose, what essentially is that proportionate universal approach, and we know that there's a lot of evidence that that is the best way to reduce inequalities. But my question was really just as a follow-on, Roy, from what was a really good story, a really good patient case. This gentleman would often hear sort of people then say, with the digital access now that is often required for people to access healthcare, a gentleman of this age might actually continue to struggle to access care and support. Was he digitally enabled, and what do we have in place to help older people, not just older people, those of us that struggle with technology, to access services?
My grandmother would take offence because she's very digitally savvy and loves her NHS app, and she's sort of advanced years. But our team actually do discuss the ways that you can contact the practice, and we do try and run some support for people to show them sort of how to use the NHS app and accessing it. But I mean, certainly for our practice and our PCN, we very much keep the non-digital channels fully open, so you know, people can still phone the practice, but some of those patients, there is the opportunity to discuss it, but also the reassurance that actually, you know, you don't need to worry about, you know, if you don't want to use the app or can't use it, or you know, don't want to go online, that those services are still available. And I think actually it was the reassurance with this particular gentleman that actually, you know, he didn't need to go online because he sort of read that was how you had to contact your practice now. So I think you're right. There's a sort of reassurance piece as well as the education.
Thanks very much. Mark?
Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Roy. My question's around where all the PCNs are on this. I wondered whether the story you gave, which is great, is it typical or atypical, and are all PCNs in the similar place, or are they sort of playing catch up with each other? which I would expect, because of course we're not going to be all moving together at all things at the same time? And how do we ensure that we try and smooth that good practice across to others as best as possible?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we are in different places. You probably know that our organisation is a single organisation, primary care network, so that does make this sort of work easier for us, and we've been doing it for longer. But I think all of the networks are looking at this and considering how best to manage their frailty population. And the ICB is funding 3 accelerator pilots in Worcestershire and 1 in Herefordshire, which are really looking, and we're one of those, looking to sort of try out different ways and different models and then feed that back. So we're sort of capturing the learning and really, you know, what works and what approaches work best. So there's definitely lots going on, but there's also potentially lots of sharing and developing, you know, best practice. And I think how we use things like digital tools, you know, what works best. And I know when our team started, they set off with one set of reports about looking at severely frail patients, and they very quickly found that actually those weren't the right patients because they'd already been identified as severely frail. They'd got everything they needed in place already, and it was the ones without a code or that needed the update. So I think there's learning there around actually where do you focus your resource, and it's sometimes not where you'd expect. So I think the answer is yes, we're in different places, but we're doing lots of sharing, and hopefully we'll sort of, you know, get to the right level and focus on the right problems.
Thank you very much. Russell has just prompted a question about perhaps whether we've got a non-digital user group to understand how we can better help the population that Mark was talking about. And I think, Katie, do you want to pick that up? I think you said that you'll talk to the team about that.
I'll talk to the team about that. I don't think, Joe, that we have at the moment, but I will go away and talk to the team and see if that's something we can get set up. And I saw Joe liked that. So Joe, we might talk to you about ways in which we can make that happen. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Joe, did you want to come in at all?
Yeah, I was just going to say we did a deep dive into digital exclusion at the last HIP board, or into digital, and some of the actions coming out of that will address exactly the point that Russ has made there, recognising that some people won't access digital services in the way that others will, and to prevent an increase in health inequalities, we need to compensate for that. So as Katie said there, it's something that's being looked at following up recent work.
Thank you. Sorry, Joe, did you want to come in?
No, that was fine.
No, fine. You're happy that we've addressed that. Great. Thanks very much, everybody. I mean, I think it's a really good story. I do want to just reinforce, I think, the points that, you know, in response to Jane's question and then the discussion that followed as well, in addition to the conversation about, you know, making sure, you know, that our digital programs are inclusive, and we're considering all of those aspects. I think I think it is, as Sarah said, called the principle of proportionate universalism. I think that is the correct technical term, isn't it, about around making sure that yes, we are universal in our services, but we are also targeting where they're most needed. And I do think that's important as part of our sort of building a sustainable future programme that's been referenced in Simon's report, that we really think about, because I think there is evidence, isn't there? I hope my primary care colleagues would support this, that sometimes the people who most need our services, actually, particularly from more deprived communities, tend to be the last to access them, and they tend to, people can sometimes access them only when they're at most need, and actually therefore more acutely unwell. And so that sense of really being proactive in our approach and focused in the way that we prioritise our resources is really important. So just wanted to reinforce that. But thank you very much, Roy, for sharing that story and for illustrating well the opportunities that I think are available to us. Thank you to colleagues for their comments. And we have got obviously a spotlight on digital on our agenda, which will be coming back to as part of that. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Simon for his Chief Executive's report, please.
Thank you, Christian. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to do this in 2 parts today, if that's okay with everybody. Firstly, I'll cover the report, and we'll stop for any questions on items contained within the report. But secondly, I think I've spoken to Christian and we felt it appropriate that we should spend a bit of time then talking through. I will do a verbal overview of where we've got to with urgent care performance over the time period since the last board. It's been so important. There's been quite a big media profile. It's something most people on the call have been very involved in. We aren't at the point when we can do real reflection and evaluation, because in many ways we're still in the middle of winter, but it does feel like something the board should be briefed on. So I'll do the report first, and then we'll have a part B, if you like, to the Chief Exec report, where I'll do a verbal overview, and I know Jane, Stephen, Mary and others can help perhaps with some questions, some discussion about that. So assuming that's okay with everybody, just in terms of the written report. So as ever, it comes around very quickly, but NHS England require us to note our emergency planning, resilience and response core standards position. So that's the ask of the report, along with the additional information. Just to pick out a few other points of highlight. So a number of board appointments and reappointments that are listed on page 1 and 2. So congratulations to those board members who will be serving a further period with us on the board here. Secondly, probably as covered in Mark's report, and as Christy mentioned, we don't have planning guidance yet, but it does appear to be fairly imminent. I was going to make the point today, and what we describe in the report is just how important delivery of this year's plan, the 24-25 plan, is going to be in terms of going into our planning processes for next year. So specifically the deficit support that we get, which is £80 million this year, our ability to negotiate a figure that is reasonable for next year will be heavily dependent on the delivery of where we get to this year. So you'll see on page 2 just some headlines around delivery. I think we have got concerns, particularly about some of the workforce numbers and some of the workforce controls. So a plea really to partner members to go back into your boards and to just refocus over this last 2.5 months of the year. I think we're going to get close to delivery of the plan. It would be fantastic if we could deliver the plan, mainly because of the confidence that we can collectively have then in our ability to deliver this, and we can project that confidence through to NHS England colleagues. And a secondary point to that, really, we also need to continually start thinking about how we're going to build sustainable services moving forward. And the board describes an approach that I think we should be putting in place over the next week or two around building a sustainable future programme, which picks up and builds on a lot of the clinical engagement work that Will has led with clinical and medical leaders, but starts to talk about how we could approach delivery over the medium and longer term in this system in a way that gives us a bit more viability and sustainability. So really, really important stuff strategically and linked into that whole planning process. The only other bit I wanted to cover, so on page 6 of the report, we should note the government white paper on devolution and specifically the impact that's going to have on our local government structures. So that's twofold really. So firstly, in Worcestershire, where there is a 2-tier local authority system, that will move at some point to a single-tier unitary council. So we will see a change in the structure. We have 6 district councils and 1 county council. That will change over the coming months. I think the latest from colleagues in Worcestershire is they have submitted a request to be in the first wave of that. So that could happen very quickly, dependent on the government departmental view of that. But secondly, and probably just as importantly for us, councils are also asked to be part of what are called strategic mayoral authorities, which are bigger patches where a number of unitary authorities will work together, probably under an elected mayor. And it's clear in the paper what will happen is they will align police and crime boundaries, health boundaries and other things. So clearly a medium and longer term impact for us around how the devolution debate then progresses locally. But I'll stop there, Christian, if that's okay, and happy to take any questions on those things before we move on to UEC.
Thanks, Simon. So any comments or questions on other areas within the report that either Simon has referenced or not? Because there's a lot of good, interesting content in the report as ever. Rachel, please.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as ever, Simon, it's a really useful and informative report. Thank you. And it's just an observation, really, the Building a Sustainable Future programme. This is really key for us, isn't it? And everything that we're talking about today on this agenda, not that I want to preempt the agenda, I feel kind of links into that somehow. So it's how at some stage we get our thinking together to wrap all of that round to turn it into a really clear delivery programme, and you know how all of that weaves in and fits in together. So it's a bit of an observation, really, because I think that kind of trailblazes a lot of things that we're talking about today, personally.
Thank you, Rachel. And it's such an important focus for us as a board, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, we obviously do need to address the here and now immediate challenges, but there's also that important focus for us in making sure that we get the future right and we're fit for that future, really. And that's not just about financials, it's about how we work and how we transform that's going to help us ensure that we get our financial plans right as well. So a lot of work to do there, I think. I'll let Simon and Mark or others comment on that if they wish, but I can see there's somebody else wants to come in. David, please.
Yeah, thanks, Krishni. Yeah, I wanted to echo what Rachel said there about welcoming the importance of that Building a Sustainable Future programme. But also, Simon, under mental health update, you mentioned the procurement of an enhanced emotional wellbeing and mental health offer. Is this something extra which will help to shorten the waiting lists for assessment and treatment for children and young people?
Yeah, thanks, David. So this is where we have consolidated a service offer actually across both counties. So it's one of those tidying up type exercises that I think we'll probably be doing forever, to be honest, as we work our way through some of the legacy services and contracts that we inherited. But yeah, very much that is designed, there's an investment gone into that service that is designed to be an earlier intervention and support to prevent children and young people in particular needing the more specialist end. And of course, we need to focus on the specialist end of the pathway, but that particular service that's coming into place in April is all about the pre-children, child and adolescent mental health services and a preventative type support network that can hopefully help and support people and prevent exacerbation of their health need, really, in that sense.
Thank you.
So yes, I mean, oh, sorry, Nigel, do come in.
No, just really going back to the Building a Sustainable Future programme, which is a very welcome piece of work. You know, this is obviously clear to where we're going. I think I would just like to raise the caution that as we progress with that work, we just need to bear in mind that there is a tension that may exist with that with neighbourhood innovation, and striking that balance has got to be key, so that we don't centralise too much at the expense of neighbourhood working and neighbourhood innovation, and we need to be sensitive to that nuance, I think.
Yeah, Christian, I'll come back on that if I can. I mean,
yeah.
That will be a critical element, Nigel, of the programme. Building a Sustainable Future is not about and cannot be about centralising everything, because sustainability for many services actually comes from a neighbourhood focus, doesn't it? So you're absolutely right. We do need to have both of those elements included within the work, and we will make sure that happens.
Thank you. And certainly just really wanted to also, indicate my real sort of pleasure at seeing that the procurement of that CYP wellbeing service, because I do think that's that it links very clearly to the priorities in our integrated care strategy, I think, in terms of well-being and mental health of children and young people, which I know both counties have sort of put high on the priority list. So that's really good to see. And also some positive, it was good to note Claire Fuller's visit to the system and the feedback, which I think was really positive given the work given the role we know that primary care will have and does have and will have going forward in terms of that left shift. But also quite, like to see we're picking up digital again, that the CHC digital project as well was just good to know, because all these things are positive signs. So thank you very much for the report, and I particularly wanted to thank in public Sarah Raystrick for her support to the board as deputy chair, and thank her for and also for her continuing on our board as Vicky is as well, and I look forward to continuing to work with other colleagues as well. But thank you particularly to Sarah for her support over the last couple of years. Okay, Simon, we'll go back to you then for the discussion on UEC.
Yes, I just want to provide a fairly brief overview as to where we're at, what's been happening, what demands look like, and the actions that we're taking. And we will bring back in March, there'll be time for a more formal evaluation of the winter plan, and to start a process of reflection to try and work out what we're learning as we're going along, which is always just as important here. But I do think it's quite a big strategic issue for our system. We've had a lot of media interest, both here in Herefordshire and Worcestershire, but actually right across the NHS. It's clearly been a very challenging period operationally since our last public board meeting that was in the middle of November. I mean, firstly, and probably most importantly, we need to acknowledge the impact that challenging operational picture has had on patients. I think waiting times and the access to services and the experience has been below the quality that we would want and we would expect, really. And that's not just unique to Herefordshire and Worcestershire. It's similar in lots of parts of the country. But in terms of the wait time people are having to wait in our ED departments, in terms of the time it's taken to get some patients off the back of ambulances and into ED, that's below the standards we would want, and we need to acknowledge that. And I think secondly, and probably related to that, we have to acknowledge therefore the pressure and the circumstances that a lot of our staff are having to work under, and how hard people are having to work. This is a really difficult time. And none of that could ever be in question, the effort and commitment of the staff, and we need to be grateful for the lengths that our people go to try and meet patient needs. I think demand is complicated, so we've clearly been through a period since the last board meeting. We have had a pretty bad flu season. I think you can never tell until you get to the end of kind of March, really, and you can look back properly over the whole 2 or 3 months just what's happened with flu. But certainly at this point it looks like around Christmas and just after Christmas there was a real spike in flu locally and elsewhere in the country, actually. And certainly when I look at the number of beds that we had people with flu in hospital, that peaked at 150 in Worcestershire acute beds, it peaked at 32 in Herefordshire acute beds. Those numbers are really on a par with almost the peak that we saw in the middle of COVID. So we've definitely had a flu season that has led to more people than we probably would have expected needing to be hospitalised. That probably manifests itself in attendances. So when I look at attendances to A&E departments, they were 9% higher in Worcestershire in December 24 as opposed to December 23. They were 6% higher in Herefordshire in December just gone as opposed to the year before. We also, though, have had probably less ambulances, oddly, so probably 5% less ambulances overall. But clearly within that attendance growth, a lot more patients are choosing or are walking in, probably are iller walking in than they would have been previously. I think it's also worth reflecting general practice feels this isn't just about the hospital. So general practice demand also feels that pressure. So again, I look at the total volumes of appointments that we've offered, and that continues to be the highest in the Midlands. So in Herefordshire and Worcestershire, in December, we offered 562 appointments per 1,000 population. I think the next highest system was the Black Country, which was 497. So considerably higher volumes of appointments being offered locally. I think we then worked through in terms of what happened in terms of performance. Clearly, there's a lot of patients wanting to access a lot of services, but a lot of that pressure manifests itself in the A&E department. It's the most visible bit, I guess. And the number of people that had to wait more than 4 hours, which has always been a key barometer really of A&E and hospital and system flow, actually, that decreased significantly during December. So in Worcestershire, 39.2% in Worcester, 32% in the Alex, compared to 63% of people in Hereford who waited less than 4 hours to be treated in December. So way below levels that we would want really in terms of waiting. And then a lot of people had to wait more than 12 hours in the department, which again isn't just the case here. It's happened in a lot of hospitals across the country, but a lot of people having to wait longer than we would want in A&E departments. And then a lot of people, more people, we lost 28% more hours of paramedic time in this December just gone than in the December before. So a lot of paramedics having to sit with patients on the back of ambulances waiting for the transfer of their care into our A&E departments. I think, as we discussed at our previous board meeting, we have a system-wide plan. We've still got a system-wide plan, and we have actions at each place, each of the 2 counties, to try and reduce length of stay, maximise discharges, manage front door demand as much as we can. We need to be able to do a proper and full evaluation of all of those things, and a proper reflection. And we're still in the middle of trying to deliver a lot of those schemes. I would reflect one of the things we're not getting right yet is the reductions in acute length of stay. So we're building our bed models on reducing length of stay in acute hospitals and in community hospitals. We're not yet seeing much of that reduction. In fact, in many ways, the trend is going in the wrong direction. So we do need to understand the detail of that. In addition to the winter plans, as always happens, we add stuff on as we're going along. Stephen in Worcestershire had closed a pathways discharge unit and was 24 beds, had 24 beds less than last winter. That's had to reopen over recent weeks because of the pressure. And we're trying to get different approaches to front door streaming, and specifically as to how we use the same day emergency care facilities that we've got. And actually we've invested a lot of money in the last couple of years. So the use of those, the ability to get ambulances straight to those same day emergency care facilities are really important in both counties, actually. And we need to continue to work on that without a fragment of a doubt. And we also have got a lot of work still to do on the processing of patients. So that probably specifically in Worcestershire is the processing of patients between the 2 trusts. So how we manage that needs to be more efficient. And of course, that has an impact on how long they stay. When we feel they're ready to go, how quickly we can process that patient's transfer of care to another setting, be that at home or in another facility. That's really important, and that needs to be part of the next stage of work. And we are doing clinical audits of people in all 3 A&E departments to work out just what other options there were to try and prevent them having to attend an A&E department. Part of that, a big part of that, particularly in Herefordshire, is the work with the Ambulance Trust on call before you convey. So where an ambulance goes to a patient, can they ring up a single point of access, an alternative pathway? What other choices do they have other than putting the patient in the ambulance and bringing them to A&E and potentially having a long wait within the A&E processing time? Just to finish on a couple of points. So as of today, actually, we've had a better and more stable last 7 days. Wye Valley did have to declare a critical incident at the end of last week, but I think that was as much to do with the flooding incident that we had in ED, which reduced some capacity as anything else. That was stood down on Monday. Performance in Worcestershire has been much better over the last 7 days. We've had much more minimal levels of ambulance handover delays, for instance. We've had some last night and this morning, and obviously we're looking for that to continue. Demand has also fallen slightly as well since we've got past that first week in January. It looks like January attendances on the current trend will be 8% less than December. So again, that does feed the perception that we've seen a real spike in flu that's just tailed off a bit, really. So there is some stability, but we need to be prepared for further demand spikes. Winter is far from over. We've got several weeks yet to go, and we do need to try and do everything that we can to help improve that flow of patients through ED departments. I think for us, from a system point of view, it really does reiterate just how important a lot of that service integration work that we're doing and that alignment work, the integrated neighbourhood teams, all of the demand management, as well as the integration alignment of some of the processing. This health and care system, just like most health and care systems, it's complex and it's difficult, and we need to do everything that we can to remove that complexity and to get much more alignment between teams and within pathways. We talk a lot about balancing risk, don't we, and trying to make sure that there is definitely a disproportionate amount of risk that manifests in the ED departments, mainly because they're always open, aren't they, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We've got to get, there's a lot of discussion about how we balance risk between acute services and community services, and I think that's right, and we need to focus there. I also think there need to be more and more conversations about balancing risk within hospitals, within ED teams and specialty teams and ward-based teams. There's certainly a lot we could do, and I know Steve and Jane and Glenn continue to work on that. Yeah, we need to keep working on alternative pathways, admission and discharge thresholds, and in particular, how can we support clinicians to make system-based, risk-based decisions and do that with our full backing. So we'll obviously continue this work. We're in the middle of this. We will bring a more thorough evaluation and reflection report back in March, but definitely I wanted to take the opportunity to bring people up to speed. I don't know, Christian, whether Stephen or Jane or anybody else or Mary wanted to add to my analysis.
Thank you, and I'm happy to bring Russell in, but I do just want to check whether Stephen and others want to come in first, just to add to that picture. So Stephen, I've prompted you now, but if that's okay, would you like to comment?
No, it's the team's etiquette, isn't it, of working out when you jump in. So yeah, just if I can add a couple of things. I mean, firstly, we know we've got an awful lot of work to do, and we know where it's not right. There are two things that I want to pull out. Firstly, around discharge, and I think there's a real focus internally, and our new chief medical officer, or substantive one now, is really taking the lead on the work on kind of what we call, as Simon alluded to, the relationship between ED and the other specialties and how they respond to that. A key bit of that focus, though, is have we got enough and the right firepower at the right time to deal with the demand that comes through. So a particular issue for Worcester Royal is the overnight position. It kind of recovers itself during the day, manages in it, and then it's overnight. And I think the approach with that is we know that's ours to fix, and that's ours to fix. There are a lot of conversations within the system as well with partners that are on the call and others. I think one of the things that as a system ask that we're going to need to focus on, and it touches on both the transaction of discharge and also some of the culture that sits behind it, is I think we have over-engineered literally every part of it, both complex and simple. So we describe simple discharges, just going home, but as we've done the deep dive, even there we've over-engineered it with, like, you know, simple things that somebody may need an adaptation or something, and I think we've just made that a bit hard. So Rob, I know, who's on the call, and Mark from the local authority, really committed to working with us. We're gonna do a lot of work and focus on that. And finally, on the ambulances, the particular issue that we find here, there's two particular issues that I think are driving the problem. One is most of the pathways have to be directed to Worcester Royal, even when you divert and you try and mitigate the demand down. The way that we've structured it, so I think there's a piece of work that we are just exploring internally, but we'll take that forward with WMAS colleagues around how we better manage the risk between the two sites. And the other one, we've been trialling it since Monday, is a kind of, it's got the name Pit Stop. If you come on the site, you'll see it. But what that is particularly for the lower category, so the category 3, as we call them, ambulance conveyances, which are typically the one that will experience long waits because they're never acute and they always get bounced by somebody who's an alert or a stroke or somebody who's coming in with something. We've been trying a pilot where we've with the ICB where we've put some ACP cover in, and they're as soon as the ambulance is coming onto site, they're doing a quick assessment. Now the initial indication is that's got real potential. We're now looking this week to extend it into falls and fractures. That's the big game for us. So just to give some assurance to people on there and the public that are watching, they're the kind of things that we're thinking through will really turn this and put us in a much better position. So I just wanted to give that context onto what Simon said.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's really good to get a perspective from you know, from the hospitals themselves, I think. Jane, can I bring you in as well, just to share yours, and then we'll open it up.
Thanks, Krishna. So I guess firstly, in terms of scale, so the last week, as we came to last week, which was the worst week. I mean, it's still very difficult, but last week was an enormous peak. So we've got 300 acute beds, and we had 375 patients requiring acute beds. So 25% more people who needed to be in acute beds than we'd actually got substantive beds. So the pressure of that is very significant. So that's an additional 5-6 patients on wards. That's the patients waiting in ED. That's the patients waiting in corridors. And so just to give a sense of the scale of that, I think what's important though is because whilst everybody can see how difficult that is to manage and how difficult for patients and staff, actually broadly our normal now, and our normal even through the summer, was that number is somewhere between 20 and 40 every day. So we're always dealing with 10% more patients than we've got acute beds for. So and when we look back at what's been happening in terms of demand growth, what we've seen actually over the last 10 years is a 5% every year increase in the demand for acute beds, and that's how we've got to where we've got. So so part of that's demand. Part of that is delay, as Simon says. I think we're broadly sort of average in terms of length of stay, but we've got to be much better to manage within the beds that we've got. Delay to discharge is part of that story. I mean, we've got a paper later on that shows there's been some significant improvement, but clearly not enough. But the really big thing that we've got to go harder and faster at is around that demand reduction. So that is about advanced care planning, proactive care in the community, and it is about that community urgent response. Now we've tripled both the capacity and the responsiveness of that. So every day we're taking between 5 and 10 ambulances off the stack, and we're getting people out to them before the patient goes into hospital. So in a sense, despite all of that really good work, actually we're still left with a demand problem that is incredibly difficult to cope with. So I think all the things we're talking about are all the right things to do, and we are on a journey and on the way to delivering them. I guess it's, given the scale of what we're facing, the question for us, I think, then is that ever going to be enough? And I think that's something we're going to have to face through as we get the group up and working on what we think our sustainable future is. But I don't think we can ignore the scale of what we're dealing with.
Thank you, Jane. So I'll just bring in our other colleagues who've been waiting to come in. So Russell.
So first of all, Simon, thank you. I thought that was an excellent summary, and as chair of Wye Valley and as Worcestershire Acute, first of all, I want to apologise to members of the public who, over this exceptionally busy period, have experienced waits and levels of care which none of us want. So I do just want to, in this public forum, apologise to members of the public and families. Secondly, I want to really emphasise thanks to our frontline teams. The level of commitment they have shown extending their shifts, supporting colleagues has been quite phenomenal. And I think on behalf of all of our board, I want to thank them, but also their families. Behind the scenes, our staff members are going home having suffered enormous levels of stress, particularly leaders, and family support in those circumstances is absolutely key to their well-being. So a big shout out to families. We do have some very fundamental problems, though, which we need to be honest about. In the UK, we are suffering from a number of challenges. First of all, we do not have anywhere near as many hospital beds as exist in other countries in Europe. Secondly, as we've talked about on the demand side, I personally can't see a situation where we're going to be able, given an ageing and growing population, we're going to easily be able to shift the demand coming into our system. The challenge for me is if we haven't got and can't build more hospital beds, which we can't, we must use our beds more effectively. And I really do fear that we are getting into a normalisation, particularly on medically fit for discharge and length of stay and flow, and we'll come on to it on the left shift work later, where this year needs to be the year where we're able, as we approach these winter pressures, to flush patients through the acute and into the community setting and find ways of doing that. But where, for example, in Worcestershire, we have 150 people with a length of stay over 21 days and a medically fit for discharge number in Wye Valley at around 40 and in Worcestershire well over 60. The system is not flowing as it needs to, and that is the only way we are going to be able to improve the safety of our care, is by making flow work, and that does require a whole system approach which needs to be different from the way we're doing it at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Vicky?
Thank you. I just wanted to comment really on behalf of a Quality Resource and Delivery Committee, because obviously the committee focuses its time and attention on the areas that are high priority and have low levels of assurance. And I think it's just to remind the board that UEC has been on alert since July 22 in terms of the inception of the ICB. In December, we spent a considerable amount of time reviewing the winter plan, which Mary presented, and the current risk register across the UEC. I think the system provider chairs of Quality and Safety Committee really add value to the committee because they provide good scrutiny and add discussions about the system solutions, some of which have all been discussed in this discussion so far. So I think the committee really recognises significant challenges, but they do remain concerned about the translation of those actions into improved performance and outcomes. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks, Vicky. That's helpful. And of course, it's a shifting picture, isn't it? You would have had that meeting in December, and then, of course, you know, some of the obviously additional pressures that we faced since then. But it's important to recognise that there has been a very strong focus on this already within committee settings of the board. Mary, please, and Mary and Simon, I don't know whether you want to make any further comments about. I mean, Russell's comments earlier, which I think, you know, I think we all recognise we do need to make some significant shifts. So, and of course, it's very much in line with, you know, what the Darcy report and indeed, you know, government have been talking about in terms of shift from acute to community. Because as Russell says, and I think we've already recognised it, that the prospects of opening more hospital beds, which are acute focused, are actually pretty limited. So yes, Mary, any particular comments that you want to make, and I'll bring Simon back in as well to finish. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Krishna. Just gathering what everyone has said together, we've had 2 incredibly difficult winters, you know, and a lot of us have been doing this a long time. And we have had some significant incidents, individual patient incidents and safety incidents, largely for patients in their own homes who can't get access to ambulances, recognising the rest of the system is in pressure as well. I think this year, and picking up I think what Russell said, this year and starting now, I don't think we can wait, because it takes us a long time to make decisions, it takes a long time to change things. We've got to be prepared to meet the demand next year, seeing in reality for patients and the frontline staff what's been happening this last few months and last winter as well. We can't go into next winter in the same position, but I think we all need to be flexible as organisations and system partners into what is best to do for our patients and our staff and change things in the next year. Now we can drive that through the urgent care board, but we're going to need complete system support and backup to make that happen. And you know, other areas will have to do exactly the same with the country. It's not just us, but we've got to sustain this very quickly going forwards.
Thank you, Mary. There are some lessons, aren't there, from other, I think there's been some rapid improvement work done in a couple of other systems around the region. I don't know whether there's any learning from any of those. I just posed that because it was mentioned to me by an NHS England colleague yesterday that there might be some opportunities there. But also, I just wanted to, before I just bring Simon back in, Simon, I suppose one of the things I picked up on, which you mentioned earlier, and I think Russell also mentioned, was just about length of stay. And I suppose in my own mind, I was thinking, is there something about acute, you know, and I think the point prevalence audit picks this up as well, about levels of acuity, but also do we need to ask ourselves whether actually we are, if I can use a very simplistic term, it probably isn't appropriate, but over medicalizing some of our, you know, decisions. And I appreciate I'm a non-clinician, so I'm sort of you know, looking to clinicians to respond to that. But I do wonder whether that is an area that we also need to focus on, because I know there has been some studies around kind of actually at a point at which, you know, we ask for too many interventions that don't add value and actually could be harmful to patients as well. So I'll just comment on that, because I think it is an area we need to look at, because it's part of building a sustainable future. But Simon, over to you for final comments.
Yeah, thanks, Krishni, and thanks, colleagues. I thought it was a good discussion. I think it's right and proper that we have this discussion. Again, give us time to spend a bit more reflection, and we can have a more detailed debate next time. I mean, there's a reality with the demand. The demand pressure is one that every single hospital and every single system in the country, and actually we've spent some time, Jane, with colleagues in Wales, haven't we, over the last month, trying to talk through some of their inputs and contributions to this. Undoubtedly, the Welsh health system is under the same pressure. There is no magic wand, or there is no plan whereby we build another couple of hospitals or another couple of hundred acute beds, which would actually probably resolve the issue for a few months, but I would suspect they would quickly fill up, and we would have the same kind of flow issues if we carried on operating the way that we operate. We've had periods before in this system where we've opened large number of acute beds, and there is a temporary relief, but actually unless you address the fundamental issues behind the demand drivers and behind the processing and engineering of patients through the flow of the system, then actually those beds quickly get. So I don't think that's the answer. Krishni, I do think you're right that we have to look even more carefully at the thresholds for admission and the thresholds for discharge, and the acute hospital beds that we have for people that are the sickest. We have to make sure they are being used and occupied by the patients that will benefit most from being there. And then that creates a whole cohort of patients who actually we need to do something different for. We need to avoid sucking them into the hospital in the first place. And when they're in there, we need to get them out much quicker, because as we've talked about a lot, for a lot of patients, particularly our frail patients, the longer they spend in acute hospitals, the sicker they get, and they have this hospital-acquired functional decline, which is a really well accepted clinical principle, and we need to try and avoid at all costs. So definitely we need to do that. Definitely we need to support our doctors and nurses and clinical professionals more, because they are the people who are making these judgments and these assessments. As I said, I think we need to make sure there's system backing for a consistent application of those thresholds. That's what we're looking for. But look, it's not been a great month or 6 weeks or so. We really do need to refocus efforts. If ever there's a reminder, it is when you look at the performance and the impact of that on patients. And that's what we're here to do, isn't it? So that's what we will focus on. So thank you for colleagues' contribution. I'd echo Russell's point around the impact this has had on staff and services, and the response times not being anything near what we would deem acceptable. We need to keep striving to make improvements and make that better. That's what we are here for, isn't it? Thank you, Christian.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to colleagues for all the contributions. We felt it was very important that we acknowledge some of the challenges we've been having and the work that's ongoing to address that in today's meeting, but we will come back to this. I think the plan, Simon, is to review where we are back in March, and as Mary said, that there's obviously needs to be an ongoing and significant focus, as Russell and others have also said, in driving forward some of the actions that we need to take before we're in this position again for next winter. And I was always a little bit hesitant as well, suggesting that it's just a winter phenomenon. In many ways, you know, that the challenges of demand and managing demand are with us all through the year, more and more, and therefore, you know, they do peak obviously, but there are some significant things, and I think it also very much is a part of the building a sustainable future that we address these immediate challenges, all linked together really. But I thank you very much to everybody for their contributions, and again I just want to recognise, notwithstanding all of the challenges, the efforts of our frontline colleagues who I know, and indeed, as Russell said, their families, and you know, the importance of us supporting their well-being throughout this very challenging period. So just reminded that we are looking at, this was part of Simon's overall update, so to remind the board that we are formally noting, as part of the CEO report, the emergency preparedness core standards position, which was included within the report, because that is a requirement for us to formally note that today in public, and obviously note the rest of the update, and we will come back to a future discussion about emergency, our review and evaluation of UEC, I think, in coming months. We move on then. We are a little bit behind time, but I think I expect we'll catch that up in later items. So over to you now, Mary, for an update on stroke services. I think this is an item you've covered with us helpfully before, and in fact we've had a spotlight on, but it was important to note an update at this stage. So Mary.
Thank you, Krishni. So yeah, this will be a short report. So this is to inform all the board members of the progress, as we outlined in the last update, on the clinical Senate review of the acute part of the stroke pathway. We've discussed a lot, haven't we, about sustainability and planning for the future, and this is a prime example of that. We know the demand for stroke services is going to go up no matter what we do in prevention with our population. We need to prepare now for the future, so we're giving the best possible care to people who've had a stroke in our system. So after a very detailed long day at the clinical Senate process with a large group of specialists from across the region, the clinical Senate endorsed our proposal for a single site acute stroke unit on the Worcester Royal site, with some recommendations that were outlined clearly, and these are recommendations that we put in our presentation to the clinical Senate, which they endorsed as well. The main one being that we have the same approach to a sustainable rehabilitation and life after stroke model. Now that we started anyway. We need to take exactly the same approach. Let's look at the next 10 years. Let's plan what stroke rehabilitation needs to look like from a non-bedded point of view and a bedded point of view, and what support patients and their families need ongoingly after a stroke. So that we've given ourselves a much tighter timescale. We've given ourselves a 6-month timescale to model what that looks like. And we've already agreed a set of principles across the ICS system of how we will do that. And that really should be based on national best practice, which is many more patients receiving their care at home. And where we do need a bedded inpatient unit, it has the proper facilities and really has the proper capacity to manage the next 10 years. So that work starts tomorrow. Actually, we've got a full away day with all the teams, and then in 6 months' time, we'll be bringing that into one joint business case with the acute stroke model that we will be presenting through the board. Now, we're not going to go out to the public consultation until we know that the resources are secured for this business case, which is going to be a challenge, obviously, given the NHS position. But we're in a position where we'll have the best model we can for stroke services for the future. That won't stop us focusing on preventing stroke. The ICS stroke board will continue to do that, and we're benchmarking very well at the moment. And also the workforce development that we need to continue to do, and some clinical aspects of the stroke services we currently provide that do continue to need improvement. So just to update the board on where we are, the full report is available for anyone that wants to see it from the Clinical Senate. We can send that round if people are interested in that. But the programme board will take forward the recommendations and ensure we have that business case ready for the summer this year.
Thank you, Mary. Rachel.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it looks like there's some really good progress going on here, and just a bit of personal feedback for what it's worth. I've had a family member who has been on your stroke pathway recently, and they had a really, really positive experience. So I just wanted to feed that back into you.
That's really helpful.
Thanks, Rachel. Number of comments or questions, Mary, so I'll just bring people in. Nigel, please, first.
Hi, Mary. I'm a bit like a stuck record on this. I just wanted to just make sure we've just been hearing about the pressures that the emergency response with ambulance service has. Clearly moving to a new model. We're seeing probably more dramatic fluctuations in ambulance supply than we would normally expect. Just for reassurance, are we building that into the model? Is there some mitigation about some, what happens when we're under big stress? Because what we don't want is to have excess mortality or excess morbidity during periods of high stress.
Yeah, just for reassurance, Nigel, the full business case includes the ambulance requirements, the transport requirements, the timescales for moving, and the staff to support moving patients as well. I mean, we are bringing a lot of digital, and I'm not an expert at this, as most of my colleagues know. We're bringing a lot of digital into the stroke pathway as well. So some pre-work with the ambulance service before patients get to the hospital, the digital digital support we can get to identify patients with stroke. We're one of the first in the region to be putting that in place, and it seems to be working really well at the moment. So we're looking at every part of the new pathway from a quality point of view as well to make sure it's sustainable.
Is that helpful, Nigel? Sounds like that's a positive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that was very much still on the agenda, because of the rural dispersion of our population. Sometimes we can get an unexpected consequence if it's not planned for.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to take account of our current reality, aren't we? Don't we, at the moment, in terms of some of those challenges? Sarah.
Thanks. Slightly picks up on Nigel's point about sort of rurality, but just a broad comment, really. There may be really detailed reasons as to why, and it may not be a core, the core purpose, but I think just on the front sheet, I think this is absolutely a piece that aligns to our corporate objective around health inequalities. I think we know the disparate outcomes based on how far away you may live if you don't have access to hyperacute stroke units, and also we know that people in poorer socioeconomic backgrounds have strokes about 7 years earlier than their comparators. Your recovery rate is very different dependent on your educational background. And there's even some studies out there which show if you were in poverty in childhood, irrespective of whether you're in poverty as an adult, your outcome from a stroke is worse. And so this is a whole, you know, it screams our sort of health inequalities agenda too, is both in the prevention, but also in that really acute end of equitable provision of services so that we don't widen health inequalities. So I think this whole piece of work and the way that you've approached it really has met a lot of our health inequality sort of way of thinking and objectives. So there may be technical reasons why the box isn't ticked, but even so, I do think this piece of work really is one where I know you've got a lot of focus on health equity and not wanting to, as Nigel was alluding to, inadvertently worsen outcomes and widen inequalities. So thanks for what you're doing, and I just wanted to champion that point. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah, and that's really important. So, you know, it's not just the technical point, but that there is a real sort of focus on health inequalities, or health equity, I think you called it rightly, as part of this overall project. So, so Mary, that's probably just to kind of note really, and it's important that we recognise that. Vicky, please.
Thank you. Mary, I just wanted to check, I'm sure it is the case, but you said about the public consultation not taking place until the resources were in place. But can we just have confirmation that public patient engagement expert users are part of the work that you described starting from tomorrow?
Oh, yeah, I mean, they have been for the last 7 years doing the acute stroke pathway. We have very strong patient public voices, including both health watchers who never miss a stroke board meeting. They are fully engaged and endorsing this. And indeed, for the pre-consultation work that we did that I described at the last board meeting, we had even I was shocked at the numbers of patients and public that attended those events. That's been very strong.
That's great. Thank you, Mary, for the confirmation.
Thanks, Mary. And I've certainly seen some positive things shared, I think, on social media occasionally about engagement on this publicly. So, so that's good. And just to pick up that David Mahaffey has confirmed that we do have a health inequality ambassador from the Stroke Board, who's a very active member of our network.
She is,
so,
yeah.
so that's really important, I think, to recognise. Okay. Stephen, please.
Thanks. It's to support, I guess, and emphasise the bit Mary said about the rehabilitation pathway. Particularly, I'm thinking of the Worcestershire system where it's spanning a number of providers. I think we've got to be really careful with this one. Agree with the model, agree the direction of travel. Clinically managing the teams when they've got outliers and things like that, there's a danger that will actually go against the left shift that we want to do. So I think that sorting out of that pathway has got to be a real kind of priority for us, because the danger is we'll have a pressure to actually go against it and do that push to increase acute beds, which is what none of us want to do, and we can't afford it. It's not sustainable. So just any support on that would be really get behind that one, I think.
Mary, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, that would be really helpful. I mean, what we are seeking to achieve on this is one clinically managed pathway across the whole ICS for stroke. You know, we don't have that. We benchmark well on stroke. The numbers aren't massive in our system, but they will grow. But if we have one clinically managed system from the acute pathway all the way through rehabilitation, you know, we'll have better outcomes for patients. The research shows that, but we'll have a better managed system as well, particularly related to flow. So, Stephen, I totally agree. If we don't change the way of working as well as the structural elements, we will not seek the full improvements that we plan. So yeah, that will be discussed very strongly tomorrow.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary. David, please.
Thanks, Krishni. Mary, I just wanted to actually welcome what you just said, because we often talk about service transformation, and here is an example where we have seen the problem, we have transformed how the service looks, transformed how we deliver it, going to deliver it, and looked forward over a 10-year horizon to ensure we have the right solution transformed solution in place for the next 10 years. So I wanted just to make that point that we talk about transformation, and here is one.
Thank you very much, David. Tracy?
Thank you, Chair. So obviously huge amounts of work already we can see going through this. What I wondered was in other sectors where they've had a reassessment of their stroke services, it's escalated through politically and sometimes had to go through to Secretary of State for approval. So have we got any inside information on the expectations around that, recognising that already publicly you've said there's positive support, but when it is more publicly discussed, if there is challenge, where that might lead us. And then the second point was if the stroke services move a little bit like Nigel mentioned, but not just in the community, will it affect any other services that the ED can provide if it hasn't got a stroke facility such as vascular, etc.?
Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. So on the first point, we fully engaged both of our council briefing, and we haven't had any reactions that would suggest political issues going forward. You never know though, do you? Remembering we were one of the first in the country 7 years ago to suggest this, but many others have come and done this across the country because it is now being put forward as the best practice model by the National League for Stroke. So whilst at the moment I think now we've got the clinical clinic back up, I can't see there being a big political issue with this, but we will monitor the situation closely on that, and we are keeping close to both councils on this, and not been a problem so far. Secondly, remembering the stroke pathway that's being proposed for the A&E part of the stroke pathway for those patients in Powys and largely South Herefordshire, they will still go to the A&E at Hereford to have their scan and treatment if necessary, and then move to Worcestershire for the period of the acute stroke unit work. So the A&E will still have that function. It's the inpatient setting at Wye Valley Trust that will change the acute stroke unit.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks very much. And I think just on the point about, providing we have that extensive public engagement, in many ways, our politicians respond to members of the public's concerns, don't they? And ultimately, I hope that through the extensive engagement with Health Watch and members of the public and patients that we've already would seem to have done, that really helps us to drive this forward, hopefully in a positive way. So we thank Mary, you and colleagues for driving this through to the place that it is at the moment, and obviously note the progress and look forward to supporting further developments on this. So thank you very much for the update, and thanks colleagues for their questions. I suggest we take the best value care and the right setting update next, and then have a short break and come back to the spotlight after that break, as we're still a little bit behind time. I do think we have a possibility of catching that up though. So David, over to you please for item 10 then.
Morning, Christian, morning all. I will take that as a steer to make sure that I don't ramble on too long on this particular item. So just quickly bring out some of the headlines from this report. In May 2024, last year, so about 9 months ago, we brought the Best Value Care in the Right Setting report to the board, which was a report that combined the demand and capacity modelling we'd done over 10 years with what was Point Prevalence Audit 2 at that time. Since then, we've done Point Prevalence Audit 3, which took place on the 18th of September, where we repeated the same methodology in the same settings as we did in Point Prevalence Audits 1 and 2. So this year we audited 1,700 patients in a little more than 80 care settings. I would just like to thank all staff in the providers for their support in what is a massive logistical exercise once a year to do that level of audit, and it just wouldn't be possible without their input. So a big thank you to the staff who continue to support this annual audit, which we will be doing again in this coming September. So the report in front of you today brings out the latest findings and the actions from the work, and I'll just pull out just a few headlines, but go into questions more quickly than I perhaps otherwise would have done. I'm conscious of time. So in terms of the numbers of patients audited on page 3, I think it's notable that we did audit more patients in acute settings this year. So going back to Jane's point, that wasn't a function of capacity changes in terms of more wards or anything like that. It does appear to be a function of boarding on acute wards where there were more patients on the same number of wards than previously. We audited slightly fewer patients in community hospital beds and other community settings such as care homes on pathways. That was partly due to partial closure of a ward in Evesham because of a maintenance issue or a collapse of the roof, and also fewer pathway 3 beds that were being used in care homes. So we had a more efficient discharge process where we weren't using as many pathway 3 care home beds for that pathway. But what we did see is similar numbers of patients treated in the out of hospital settings, which was essentially pathway 1 and community teams, etc. In terms of the results shown on page 3 and page 4, we saw some really significant difference in Herefordshire this year compared to the previous years, particularly in the acute and out of hospital settings, which Jane may wish to say more on when we get into the question and answer session on what drove those changes. But we think we can pin it down to some specific changes that took place between the 2 audits that have resulted in those changed actions. We saw a small decline in Worcestershire's results, where the results dropped back to a similar position to the baseline in 2022, following a bit of improvement in 2023. So we clearly need to do some more work to explore what drove that. And community hospital results were largely the same. They have been the same for the last 3 years in both counties, where around 50% of beds, or almost 50% of people in community hospital beds, could be somewhere else receiving their care. So that's clearly a big opportunity for us to look at to make sure we're using our resources as efficiently as possible, and that will form a big part of the Building a Sustainable Future programme. And just on out of hospital settings, there looks like there's little opportunity to improve, though a little opportunity rather than little opportunity, but the numbers have stayed consistently high, and with Herefordshire now being in a position where 80% of patients on pathway should have been there rather than previous results, which were nearer 50%, then that shows that there have been some significant improvements there. So the report does address some of the flow issues that Russell commented on in the earlier item, and you'll see that on sort of page 6. I won't go into the detail there, but there is some measures that do indicate that we recognise where some of those flow issues manifest themselves, and we are doing some work through the Worcestershire Efficiencies programme as part of the BSF programme to take that forward. And then finally, the report also picks up on that second kind of key component of our left shift strategy to move services from acute to community, and that's virtual wards. So during 2024, we saw a 17.5% increase in the use of virtual wards in terms of the uptake of them, and the report outlines some of our plans for increasing the number of virtual wards going forward as part of that strategy. I mean, I think it is worth emphasising that we will still be below the NHS England target for, or expectation for, virtual wards, but I think equally it's worth emphasising that over the years we've really invested in community and primary care services that have provided us with the kind of out of hospital care arrangements that some other systems are now implementing as part of their virtual ward programs. So it's always it's never a simple measure, X number of virtual wards per measure of the population, because we've got far more community hospital beds than most systems. We've got better primary care and community services than many systems. So it's a difficult comparison to draw, but there's further work happening there. So I will pause at that point, and I'm sure there will be some questions to address.
David, thank you. It's a really helpful report, as I think David Whiteman has said, and I think the fact that we continue to repeat it every year does really help us kind of understand or get a picture, both for things that are perhaps more immediate and affecting our performance currently, but also in terms of, I know, one of the primary things that we use it for is thinking about future capacity and modelling as well. So really great piece of work, and as you rightly said, thank you to all the colleagues who are involved in that, because this is a system piece of work which is coordinated by the ICB, but you know, all partners are involved in it. Or pretty much all partners are involved in it, so it's really positive. And actually, helpfully, you've answered a question I was going to raise on virtual wards later, and our sort of perceived underperformance on that, because you know, that population-based target on virtual wards it does sort of strike you as something that we're quite short of, but you have referenced that helpfully, although we may want to pick it up in the next item anyway. So Russell, I think you wanted to come in.
First of all, thank you, David. And as you said, David, thank you to everyone who's been involved in producing this, because I do think it's helpful. I think it's also, though, one of those classic situations where percentages can unfortunately disguise what I think the real challenge is. So keeping the maths easy, we have around 1,000 acute beds in Hereford and Worcester, and what the point prevalence study is saying across Hereford and Worcester is roughly 250 of those beds had patients within them who shouldn't have been within the acute setting. In our community beds, we have, keep the maths easy, around 300 beds, and the percentages show that roughly 150 of those had patients in them who shouldn't have been in the community bed. So that gives a total, if my maths is right, of over 350 beds in our system, which should be available to us to improve flow. And going back to Mary's presentation and Simon's introduction on the UEC challenges we're facing at the moment, for me, 2025 needs to be the year where we really make sure those beds are available for people who need them. And the way we're doing things at the moment is just leading to incremental improvements, whereas we need a really big step improvement if we're going to avoid a 2025-26 winter crisis again. My second point is on capacity, particularly social care capacity, which is clearly an issue indicated in David's analysis. I am deeply worried about what happens to social care capacity after April, given the increases in national insurance as it hits domiciliary care providers and care homes who are commissioned by local authorities. And I think at some point, Simon, if we can have a piece of analysis as the local authorities agree their fee settlements with the domiciliary care providers and care home providers, what that does to capacity. Because my fear is when we do this again this year, the social care capacity will have dropped because of the impact of national insurance. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Just on the second point, I think we've captured that, haven't we, in our actions, that that is one of the things that we touched on last time and that we felt we needed to do a bit more understanding around. And the action suggested we were waiting for the operational guidance to sort of really evaluate the level of risk associated with that. So, but I'd welcome any further comment from, well, Mark, David, or Simon on that. But certainly on the previous point that Russell made as well, do Simon or David want to make a comment on that?
Just I don't think we would disagree, David, would we, to be honest? I mean, it's what the point prevalence audit does very neatly is provide us with the information and data to set the challenge, as Russell has done. Of course, it's multifactorial and really, really complicated. And there's probably 100 things need to happen for those 300 beds to become available to us. But you are right. And when I said earlier that actually we're not going to be able to open loads more acute beds. We do need to make sure the ones we've got are used for those people that need them most. That then emphasises what Russell and the point prevalence audit are saying. I think for the board's benefit, when you really get into this, what you realise is actually the ward staff managing those beds are probably the biggest determinant of which patients are in there, and all of this capacity can be out and available, but until we support the ward staff to make those decisions and there to be a push factor, actually we're not really going to get very far. But I agree with Russell that we should make this year as the year we plan and focus on bigger at scale change to drive a bigger impact rather than the incremental progress. I mean, Russell and Paul will come in soon, I'm sure, but we're worried as well about the impact on the social care and domiciliary care market. Of course, we will work really closely with local authority partners. We commission some of that care through the Better Care funds. We have a bit more influence, therefore, on the price. But just as an example, me and Mark Dutton have had several letters from providers of social care, packages of care and beds asking for price increases, and they range from kind of 10% to what was the one we had on Friday, Mark? I think it was 18.8%. The particular provider were asking for as a price increase on the 1st of April. So we should be under no illusion of the impact on the market of the changes in national minimum wage, national insurance thresholds, and employers' national insurance changes. All of those things will have an impact on the price of what we have to pay for some of these services.
Thanks, Simon. Jane, please.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to just say a bit more detail about those sort of quite significant changes that we've seen in Herefordshire, and really it's been primarily around two things. One is Paul's team have done a fantastic job on increasing the capacity of home care. That's made huge difference, and then we've done a reasonable job at improving the productivity of our Home First team, and so getting more patients home through Home First. And what that means is broadly that pathway one, which is patients going home but needing some support to be at home. It's a handful of patients every day who wait, and generally they're waiting a day or a day and a half. There's not the significant waits we've seen that. So that's what's prompted that really big change, which is sort of back to my previous comments. But even given that, the acute pressures are where they are, having made a change of around about 30 patients from where we were last year, who are now no longer in acute or community hospitals. What isn't fixed, I mean, I would say that's almost fixed, bearing in mind that it may get unfixed again once those price changes come into social care. The pathway 2, pathway 3 is still a very significant problem for us. So getting patients out at the right time where they need a bedded facility, so that they don't wait for those bedded facilities in acute or community hospital capacity. We've got a lot more work to do on that. The other area I'd just come back to, though, is yes, we absolutely need this to be the year of transformational change. But if we look at what we're planning to invest in terms of increasing virtual ward urgent care capacity, we're not planning really to make very much investment in. I think we're planning to make no investment in Herefordshire. Unless we're going to do some of that upfront investment, I think it's going to be very difficult to make the next step change. So I think we may need to relook at that.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you. I mean, I'll bring Paul in actually, but just wanted to, I think, commend partners involved in making those improvements, which has obviously been a significant piece of work working together. Paul?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jane, for those comments. I mean, I think the product of some really good co-production work there in terms of recognising where we wanted to get to and how do we use our collective resources to have an impact there. So pleased that's progressing well, and there's more to do. But just on the issue of NI and national living wage, yes, we've done a good deal of work, as you'd expect, with our provider forum. So we've got a sense of the impact through the provider forum in terms of cost of that. and we are currently taking our draft budget through our governance processes. We were published this week, and we have taken account of those increases in the care provider market in the draft budget which has been proposed for 25-26. But clearly that's just one element of the conversation, Russell, in many respects. So I think helpful to come together as we look across the system and look across the kind of the funding opportunities, not just through the council's revenue budget, but also as Simon mentioned, in terms of the Better Care Fund and how do we spend that money well in the areas that it needs to be spent with. So pleased to share that as that progresses through our governance process, and I think it would do well to factor as a piece of work that comes back here to see how the public sector across the system is responding to that pressure, as a suggestion.
Thanks, Paul, and we'll certainly pick that up as part of that wider action that we've noted already. So really helpful. So thank you, David, for the update. I don't know if you want to make any final comments, but I do think, you know, there's a lot to what this reinforces is some of the things that we'd already, I think, touched on as part of the UC conversation in terms of, you know, the recognition around beds and the points that Russell made, but also around discharge processes, which the paper reinforces as work to be done, really. And I think you're asking us to note that this work will be taken forward as part of the Building a Sustainable Future programme, which we have all recognised is really important. So if there's nothing further, David, shall I close the item there?
Yeah, nothing further to add.
Right.
No questions, thank you.
But thanks again to everybody for their participation in that and contribution to that. I suggest we take a break now and reconvene at 11:15 if we may, so we can press on with our agenda, and particularly the spotlight on digital, which we haven't been able to cover yet. But I think it's really important. So if we pick that up at 11:15, that would be great. So I look forward to seeing everyone back then. Thank you. Right, everyone, welcome back. Make sure we've got everybody. So, Katie, we are handing over to you for the spotlight on digital, and yeah, over to you.
Thank you, everybody. I'll start by just giving a brief intro to what the paper's about. I recognise we don't have huge amounts of time and we'll want to do more on questions, but fundamentally what we want to do today is bring two elements to your attention. So one is the digital strategy, which we're seeking endorsement from the board for, and then an update on our review into the shared care record, which is a fundamental part really of the strategy and probably the backbone of the strategy. So I will start by taking you through a little bit on the digital strategy and then move on to the shared care record. We've all agreed that we need to have a ratified digital strategy across the system, and NHSE would agree with us as well. And what you've got in front of you is a culmination of a lot of work that previous digital directors have done in conjunction with your teams across the system. We've brought this together, we've refreshed it, we've looked at it in line with our own priorities to ensure that we've got it aligned with the ICS strategy and with the national strategy from NHSE as well. And we've made sure that it aligns with the strategies across the organisations too, so that we're not overloading anywhere, particularly in the system. We've also had a conversation with you in the development session at board around where our priorities sit. So we've captured that within the strategy today. That we brought to you today, and what I really want to draw your attention to are slides 3 and 10, which I think give you the headlines of what the strategy says. So the conversation we had at board development session around where we needed to spend more of our time gives you the picture that we've got on slide 3. Slide 3, which basically shows that we'd be putting more of our time and attention on those first two pillars of the strategy initially, which is about getting the infrastructure in the right place and enabling integration of data in the first couple of years, but doing some of the groundwork that enables the pillars 3 and 4, so the environment to allow people to self-serve and the transformation of services around the user. So we would be doing a lot more of that upfront work on the left-hand side of those 4 pillars to begin with, and then moving into the right-hand side with more force in years 3 to 5. And if you look at slide 10, that gives you what that means in a bit more detail. We would be focused heavily on the shared care record, which I'll come on to in years 1 and 2. We know the trusts are all putting their EPRs in place, or will do over the lifetime of this strategy, and doing a lot of frontline digitisation and work with primary care. But over time, we want to get a longer term vision of what our infrastructure looks like and what some of the protocols and policies are for putting more bits onto our infrastructure. So that we've actually got some level of convergence happening across the system. And then in data, we want to spend more time making sure that our data flows around our system, that we can draw it out across all of the different organisations, and then cohort patient data and use that to move into prevention in the way that Roy described earlier on in the conversation in the patient story at the beginning of this meeting. But longer term, our strategy will be around having the federated data platform, which is the NHS solution for bringing data together, which is being it's in a programme plan at the moment, and it's expected that we'll all move on to that over time, and that's a big part of the elective reform plan as well, if you've had a chance to have a look at that. But we will do some groundwork now for some of the things that we will need in the later years. So some AI projects, I think Krishna, you mentioned from Simon's report earlier, the CHC project, which is about putting ambient AI into conversations with clinicians and patients to take away the sheer weight of note taking. Fundamentally, that ambient AI can hear those conversations and transcribe them into notes, which takes that need away from our clinicians. And we're going to be trialling that as well with across our system. Actually, I know all the trusts and primary care have signed up to do some of that. And then we want to do much more longer term around capability building, digital inclusion. We will start some of those things now, but we'll really ramp them up in those years 3 to 5. And we'll also do more on user-centred design reform. So we talked a bit there about stroke reform, for example. We want to get much more deliberate about doing that, but we need to build the capabilities and the teams to be able to help us to do more of it and target those in the areas where we know we've got the biggest issues. So that's in essence what we're saying we will do through the digital strategy. I need to just highlight the risk around funding. Traditionally, funding for digital has come through national team programmes. So we would be told, for example, there's some money here to bid for help on the shared care record or the patient portal. And then we take that money and try and do that thing with that product. At the moment, given the financial position across the country, that money it's unclear where that money is going to come from. And we're going to need to get very smart about using the money that we can get hold of to further the needs of this strategy. So I'm not asking for any particular funding investment at this stage, but I just want to make you aware that that is a big risk for the digital programme. But we will be creative as we look at projects to see where we can draw money out of the system, where we've already got duplication, and try and use that to help us to further our digital ends. Those are probably the key things I'd draw out. We did mention earlier NHS app and patient portal also being part of the elective reform plan as well. They are a big area to ensure that patients can manage their own care and citizens and residents can access their appointments, etc. as well. So that's another big area of focus in years 1 and 2. If I go on then to the second part of the paper, that because we've said the shared care record is our big kind of the backbone, if you like, of this strategy, much will hang off this because that is what allows patient data to move around the system. We have undertaken a review because what we heard from you when we spoke to you was it's good in parts, but it's probably not good everywhere, and the take up isn't exactly what we'd expect. So we've done a review. We've gone out to quite a number of people, as you will see in the paper. We've interviewed people, we've surveyed people, lots of users, some non-users, to see why they're not using it. And we found that all who are using it would say it is a good tool, but there are things about it that need to be better, as you may expect. So it needs to be built upon. We've found that the change management around it maybe hasn't been as good as it needs to be. So making sure that people understand it's there, training people better on it, showing people some of those hints and tips and tricks to use it really well would be helpful. So we're going to put something in place around that. We've heard from people that there's some sometimes information missing and some slow loading. So we're working with the national team to find out how we can improve upon that. And one of the things we found is that there's not a clear place where the prioritisation of development is taking place. We need more clinical input into that prioritisation of the changes that we make to the shared care record. What we currently get is a list of good ideas that may help 1 or 2 people, but probably aren't the right thing for the whole system. So we're going to put some better structures in place using more clinical leadership that informs the shared care record programme team, and we can do better prioritisation, which we then want to test with clinical leaders across the system. So we've put in there what those big bits of activity would look like over the coming few months, and we're going to pull together a programme plan around that and make sure that we have a development time frame as well. One of the things we think might be an area to go at in terms of funding for the shared care record is that we know that our clinicians often hold multiple licenses to access each other's data. We know that's happening across our system. In the Health and Care Trust alone, we know there's around £225,000 being spent on doing that. We expect it's similar in the other trusts. We're finding out the information at the moment. If the information flowed properly through the shared care record, we wouldn't need to access each other's systems. We are in essence paying other companies to give us our own data back to other parts of the system, and we want to remove that. So there's opportunities like that we could go at that would then reduce duplication and put the money back into the development of the system to make it even better. And those are the things that we're currently working through. The only other thing to mention is that I wanted to pull out of this paper before we go to questions is the contracting of the shared care record. It costs around £850,000 a year to run. Thank you to Mr. Whiteman for his eagle eyes of noting that the K had fallen out of the previous paper. That has now been updated. It is 850,000, not £850. And we have got a contract that we share with BSOL and Cobham Warwick to use InterSystems, which is our system that runs the shared care record. We've been offered the chance to stay in that contract with them for the next 7 years, and we can make a saving each year by having that contract with them. There's still a year's notice period, which is what we've currently got. So we have, under our delegated authority, agreed to continue with that contract, which the ICB has paid for, and over time we will then work out how we do the development of the pay for the development costs of the priorities that we collectively agree together. So those are the key things, I think, Chair, that I would pull out, and then I will open it up for questions.
Great, thank you very much, Katie. Really helpful summary, I think, of the paper as well. So any questions or comments? Roy, please.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, it's really useful. I think lots of this is really useful, but it's only useful if patients can use it in the way that we want to. And I guess you've talked about, I see, you've got a school for staff, but I think, do you have a clear sense of how we're going to communicate with patients about getting so embracing the digital approach? And I think I've mentioned before, we're seeing increasing numbers of young people contacting us with health problems that they probably could self-manage, and there seems to be almost a lack of awareness about things like the NHS app, and where we talked about going into schools, and I guess that sort of patient comms is really important. And do you have a sense of where we're going to sort of fix that one?
Yes, we've done a few bits, starting to build a plan around this. So I know that Tom and the team are looking at some of these communications as well. We've started to combine our NHS app team and our outreach team when we go out to do outreach on people and workforce in schools. So we're trying to do much more pointed interaction with patients and with citizens across our patch, but we will build up an even bigger plan. I've got somebody at the moment working on what a good communication strategy would look like with patients in terms of talking about how we'll share their data and how we use that to help us to do some of the prevention work that Roy, you outlined at the beginning of this session. So yes, we can bring something more detailed back on that in a future session, if that would be helpful.
Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Roy, for the question. There's a number of other comments and questions. So Aman first, please.
Yeah, my question was on a similar line to Roy's, actually. I think it's great that you're looking to re-engage the public in all of this. And first, I should have said I wanted to commend all the hard work that's happening. This is a really good piece of work and really good papers. So I just want to say thank you for that. I guess I just wanted some assurance into how we're reaching out to those hard to reach communities and making sure that we're getting the data we need from them, because I think when we spoke earlier about things, there was this kind of thought process that we don't perhaps have the data for those hard to reach communities because for whatever reason that may be. And I guess it's just how are we building that trust? And, you kind of spoke about it, letting the patients know how we're going to be using their data, but just wanted some assurance around that. And secondly, it was around the digital capability piece as well. And if we're going to be introducing new technologies, how are we going to bring the patients on board with that? So, we talk about the ambient AI where we're going to be where that will take help primary care with the notes and whatnot, but some patients might be quite nervous about that. So how are we going to assure them and give them confidence that it is the best thing for them to do and the benefits of doing that?
Thanks, Aman. Katie, do you want to respond to both of those points?
Yes, thank you. We are working really closely with the INT neighbourhood teams work at the moment, and we're looking at exactly that. Where are the hard to reach communities? where are the people that we might need to go and have detailed conversations with, and we're trying to combine bits of data. So we're trying to combine some of the secondary care data that tells us when people have had to go and use some of our acute services, community services, and we're also talking to primary care about, and our primary care networks, about how we look at that patient data and how that can flow through, and then the integrated neighbourhood teams can do some more of that outreach. But overlaid over that is some of the LSOA work that the councils have been working on. So this is where they did dial down into really small areas of the population and look at what some of the big kind of population health issues are and where they come from, because it's not always health, it's sometimes housing, education, etc. So we're trying to get the analysts to spend more time together to look at a combined picture, which will give us a more targeted approach to those areas where we need to go out and reach out to those communities. And a lot of the PCNs are already starting to do some of this sort of work. So they're doing they're running day centres where they know that they need to get out to a certain population. I know in Worcester City they've just done some work with the nighttime economy workers as well. So doing things at different times of the day so they can reach people that wouldn't naturally be around to come and do that in the working day, as it were. So we're looking at how we do that through the data, and then the teams are using that to reach their own populations. In terms of bringing patients on board, we will do that slowly through these different pilots, because we can get out to people and actively talk to them about how that data is used. I think generally people expect that this data flows probably more readily than it does. If you enter into the NHS, you kind of expect that somebody in the NHS knows where your data, what you've had done before and what you might have, what you might need next. So I think some of these conversations will probably be a bit easier than we assume, but we will go out and do that in detail through the pilots, but then we'll have a broader campaign as well.
Thanks, Katie. Vicky, please.
Thank you. Katie, obviously you brought this to QID in December, and thank you for doing that. And I think, as you know, the committee were very supportive of the strategy and all of its elements. And the strategy in itself is a very good read. So thank you to you and the team for all of the work on that. I think it was just really to re-emphasise the point that you made at the beginning in terms of those foundation steps in year 1 and 2 are contingent on the funding and obviously the delivery of those strategic objectives. So I think it's just to re-emphasise the point for the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Thanks. Russell.
Sorry, can I just turn off the fan in my office, because otherwise you won't hear me. Sorry, with that interlude, first of all, Katie, thank you very much for your leadership on this. None of this stuff is easy. I do worry, though, that in terms of our focus on digital, the purpose of digital, almost the primary purpose of digital, one could argue, is to deliver financial savings, real cash savings, which allow us to be a financially sustainable system. I worry that we're losing that sort of laser-like focus on the purpose of digital. And my worry is, sorry to use vernacular, that it's a bit like me with cars and boys' toys. It's a shiny new thing to play with, rather than it having a real substantive impact on our productivity and cost levels. And I'm worried that we're looking for big bang solutions rather than a series of simple things that we could do. So I take a practical example, Paul may be aware of it. In social care, there's a system called Magic Notes. And Magic Notes is used by lots of domiciliary care providers and care providers to produce letters to GPs, produce care plans. It is an enormously impactful, productive piece of AI. And what I'd like in our digital strategy is to see some of those things. What can we give, our doctors or nurses a piece of AI on each of their phones, which is immediately producing a draft care plan or draft letters to colleagues or draft emails, which they then sign off. So I'm just worried that in what we're talking about with the emphasis being on the shared care plan as the bedrock of everything, I'm just worried we're going to spend a lot of money and not see a lot of payback. And maybe we do need the shared care plan. I'm not saying we don't, because clearly from a patient safety perspective, things aren't very good. But the biggest patient safety issues we've got at the moment are in our UECs and a lack of capacity and freeing up monies to be able to address that. So hopefully a partially helpful perspective. But thank you for your leadership, Katie.
Thank you, Russell. I agree with you. It's certainly one of the primary things we're trying to do with digital, and the AI project that we've got going does exactly that. So that will take a piece of technology and put it on clinicians' screens, and then that will listen into patient conversations with that clinician and transcribe it up into the notes, because that is where we think we could take out big productivity. What we could take out big financial cost and gain some productivity. And if you recall the development session where we talked about this, we said, let's not go for big shiny AI at the moment. Let's only pick those pieces of AI, and I'm going to quote you, Jane, where it makes sense to do so and it's productive to do so. And that's why we're focusing on that piece of AI, because that is the one that will just do the mandrolic removing of the writing of notes and put it down into get the system to do it. There are a lot of hoops we have to jump through to make that happen, as I'm sure you can imagine. We obviously want to make sure the data's safe. There's a lot of clinical safety elements to it. There's a lot of information governance elements to it, but we are working together to try and do those as quickly as we possibly can, so that we can get it onto people's systems and they can be using it to do some of that productivity gain. Later on, when we talk about AI in the future, what we mean more than the immediate productivity gains is how you use AI to add extra intelligence. What can it see that the clinician can't see, so it can enhance the ability of that clinician to spot things. It can forecast things, so it can forecast whether somebody's likely to need to use secondary care and allow us to do an intervention sooner. We'll use AI more in that way, but where we're using AI at the moment, it's going to be for productivity gains.
Great. Katie, thank you. I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to take these 3 comments, but not revert to you for each one.
Okay.
We'll just maybe have a brief comment at the end. So if I could just bring Rob, Sarah and Nigel in, and then we'll get you to sort of do a final sum up, Katie, because we are rapidly running out of time. So Rob, please.
Yeah, thank you. It was 2 points really. The first one was really very much on the same lines as Russell was raising. We know one of the big priorities is analog to digital. We also know that is about leveraging investments that are already out there and technologies that are there to make significant productivity changes and gains. I'm not sure that comes through enough at the moment. We are going to need some big things that help us. Productivity gains has to be one of those. And I suppose it was just the comment about we're not going to be able to do much in years 1 and 2 unless we get the investment. Actually, I think we've got to have a line here which is about how do we leverage the investments we've already got.
Yep.
The second one was just on the shared care record, which I really think is really helpful to see there, Katie, and thank you. The point I was just going to make on that was, I think as you were describing, I suppose it was just to put sort of some clarity onto it, at the moment we've got some really good stuff in there, but we seem to have had an approach of let's go broad, it's everywhere. Actually get the clinician involvement, because the gains are probably in very specific areas for very specific teams of clinicians. It's probably different by sector, but certainly that's what we need to do, and I think that needs to be teamed into that prioritisation you talked about, and I absolutely agree with making that clinically led, but I see that's where we get some real benefits from that, rather than trying to spread it everywhere. It's about where it's going to make the most impact.
Thanks, Rob. Sarah?
Thanks. Just a really quick one to pick up really for the future, Katie, or just assurance in the future that we're been some interesting things sort of nationally, especially through safeguarding forums where children are the sort of protected characteristic of age, and being a child is often a barrier to using some of the technologies that we've got in place. And it's just about not setting things in process that don't allow children and young people to be able to access services just because they can't access the technology because of their age. And the same goes for the use of their data. Who is it that's given authority for the use of a teenager's data? And just checking that we're making sure that we're giving children a really fair stakes in what happens to their data.
Thanks, Sarah. Nigel?
Yeah, thank you. I'll be fairly brief. So productivity gains is what we're looking for from digital use as far as our clinical teams. My experience is that we haven't maximised what we've got at the moment. So we're looking at integrated services. We're finding that actually only a fraction of the potential of the service of the clinical systems, and they're used differentially between different teams. So there's a huge amount of productivity that we could release by proper integrated digital networking and making sure the training is there. So I think that should be there really from the first point. And then sort of another example is that I still get letters from clinicians saying, oh, the patient didn't bring their medication with them, I don't know what it was, please can you write to me, tell me what their medication was. Well, actually they could access it from the shared record. So it's a couple of examples there of where actually we're currently not maximizing what we're already got and using it due to training and probably configuration of our current systems.
Thanks, Nigel. So I suppose my reflections, Katie, just on the points that people have made, I think there was sort of quite a few common points there about maximising productivity gains, but actually that's not just about future. Actually, it's about getting people to use it appropriately now in itself should be more helpful from what Nigel was saying. And I did wonder, it wasn't absolutely clear when we talked about 4,300 unique users, what percentage of the population of possible users are not using it, because that would give us a sense of what the scale is of ambition for to growing usage. Because as with all of these things, no system is good in its own right, how well it's used, and too much technology is rolled out that actually we never use it all. I mean, I've been, I won't, just as a general point, I imagine that most of us around the room don't use everything that's available on our smartphones. And so really getting people to use the things that would drive productivity, which I think is Nigel's point as well, I think is really important. Prioritisation, I think Rob said as well, leveraging the finance that is available to us. So those are just some of the reflections, I think, Katie, for perhaps just making sure we've, represented that in the strategy. And then the only other point I think was Sarah's around CYP access and consent, I suppose, was the other bit. I don't know whether you want to comment on any of that briefly before we close.
Thank you. So the productivity point, absolutely. What we're trying to do some of that through ways of working, and as a DDAT board, we're now bringing together more around where we think we could do more with what we've got. So I'm asking the DDAT directors to be picking up where there are teams where if we could do more by explaining how to use some of the existing technologies, for example, we could do more. So if you have teams out there that you see that you think actually they could benefit from some of that, please make sure that's going through your DDAT, your digital directors, so that we can be gathering that together. Safeguarding I'll pick up separately, so that's a really helpful pointer, and I'll go away and have a look at that. On the shared care record, one of the major bits we'll work on is that change. I think that's as important as any further development. Actually, there's a lot we can do with a detailed communications program, training program, but targeting it at the areas, as you're saying, Rob, that we could really make productivity gains. I think we could do a lot with that because it's a good tool. It's the thing we've got that enables us all to see that information flow, and we want to make it the best it can be. So we'll be spending a lot of focus on making sure that really works well across our system.
Brilliant, Katie, thank you very much. I'm sorry we were a little bit more squeezed for time, but I think we've given it a good airing. I think we're saying we endorse the strategy, but we'd like that to be really focused on driving productivity and leveraging, you know, whatever opportunities we have, both financially and productivity as part of that, and the specific action, if you could take around CYP or safeguarding in particular that Sarah's raised. Is that okay? So
that's great.
Katie?
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you to colleagues as well who've no doubt contributed to putting that together for you. I found the illumination of the work around the shared care record particularly helpful. So thank you for that. Great. We'll also, I think, probably plan an update in due course, Katie. We'll think when we agree with you when that would be best to be done. So moving on then to item 12, which is our system quality and delivery report. Mary, can I suggest, in the interest of time, that I mean, obviously we've had quite a big discussion about UEC already, so perhaps we could just pick up any key points that we haven't covered already.
Yeah. Thanks, Krishni. And I was going to do that. So just 3 points I'd like to pick up, because as Vicky said, we do a lot of this detail at the QRD. So the first one is children and young people and the wait times. Just very quickly on this, Herefordshire is a continuing to improve position, which I believe was picked up in the SEND inspection recently. We now have very small numbers of children with long waits, and there is a good plan for recovery in Herefordshire. In Worcestershire, the size and scale of the problem, as I'm sure I've mentioned previously, is significant, and we are standing still really with the investment that's been put in place. So we're really looking at what we can do for the children and young people in Worcestershire to bring that wait time down. This is largely around neurodivergence assessments, and is a national issue that's been raised at the very highest level for the whole country at the moment. So, but we'll keep you updated on that. On the elective and cancer front, so obviously as part of the elective recovery, the ask nationally was nobody waiting over 65 weeks by the end of December. We haven't been able to achieve that standard, but again, most of the country hasn't been able to achieve that standard. We have had 68 patients waiting at the end of December, and that puts us benchmark very well regionally. We're third in the region on that one. Not where we want to be. We want to get everyone under 65 weeks, and we plan to recover that in the next period. Pleasingly, though, our 52-week elective position, we are very strong, and if we maintain what we have been doing, despite the urgent care pressures, we're in a good position to get 52 weeks in line with the national standard. Cancer, alternatively, you'll note from the report, there has been a slight deterioration in our cancer position, particularly in the 62-day position, largely in Worcestershire. We believe that is a temporary deterioration in position, and in Q4 we plan to recover the 62-day position for Worcestershire and overall as the ICS, and indeed then focus on the 31-day recovery of a cancer, which is largely surgical capacity that's our issue. It just shows, I think, as a system we have to be monitoring this and working to improve constantly on cancer, because it can be quite volatile, but again in a fairly strong position. And the final thing is the dementia diagnosis rate. Now I'm aware that there's the dementia programme.
Oh, Mary, you've gone on accidental mute there. I'm not quite sure how that happened.
Not sure. My hands are over here and that's over there, so I'm not sure that happened. So the dementia diagnosis rate is of concern about our achievement of that by March this year. The programme board is in place. The recovery plan, I believe, is being agreed. I think it might have been agreed while I was off, and we'll have to. The QRD will continue to monitor that very closely to see what improvements, see how the improvements are being delivered. And those are the three things I'd like to escalate out of the report, and happy to take any questions along with colleagues and anything else.
Thank you, Mary. Any questions on anything that Mary's highlighted or anything in the report? Okay, Mary, we'll note that then in terms of an update, and we'll move straight on to item 13, which is our financial plan and delivery for 24-25. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll pull out just some of the key points within the report. So the report takes us now to month 8, which is November. You'll see at month 8 then we're reporting a year-to-date deficit of 8.3 million against a phased plan of 1.9. So what we're saying at this stage is we are 6.4 million pounds off plan. You'll see the breakdown of that across the system on page 2 of the report, but as we picked up previously, it's largely been driven by Y Valley Trust, which is accounting for £4.5 million of that adverse variance. I know Y Valley have got a financial recovery board in place and they're looking at how they can put mitigating actions to bring that back, and the ICB have also met with colleagues from Y Valley looking at the recovery plan and what further support can be provided so those actions can be implemented and delivered. One of the areas I did just want to pull out though is we are in conversations with NHS England regionally and nationally about financial parity, and that's NHS Wales, particularly Paris, providing the same level of funding to Y Valley for services that they're delivering in the same way as funding comes through from NHS England and is passed across from the ICB. So we have escalated that, and that's about a £6 million risk at the moment to the system. You'll see within the report then there are some key drivers as to why we have an adverse variance. The largest one is around efficiency savings. So again, we're £4 million behind where we need to be. That will impact as we go into 25-26 because we'll need to play catch up to deliver that, and also we'll have a new financial challenge for the new year. We have the PFI technical issue, which is sitting again with Y Valley, which is 1.2 million to date, and then the additional roles and responsibilities funding within the ICB, which accounts for 1.7 million. Against our agency position then, we are 400,000 adverse to plan, so we're above where we need to be. We are continuing to monitor that very closely and have very strong controls in place. But again, we expect another significant step down in that area will be required as we go into 25-26. So again, we need to be looking now at how we can put changes in place to bring that down. The position does factor in the elective recovery fund then. So we've talked previously, and Mary's just mentioned where we're at against the actual waiting lists, but we're doing very good against the elective recovery fund. And the position is based on the forecast as at month 8. We've got actual data to month 6, which shows we're running around 122% at month 6. So that is one of the best within the region and one of the highest nationally as well. What we are waiting for though is the final guidance as to how NHS England will deal with the year-end position in relation to elective recovery fund. So again, until we understand that, and what that means and how that's going to work through, anything that effectively looks to close the year end down at a lower forecast and provide less money than what we're currently assuming will give us another financial risk. So once we understand a little bit more about that, we'll come back to the board. But again, I just wanted to flag we are waiting for that guidance imminently. At the moment then, we are showing continuing to show our forecast will deliver our agreed plan, and we are still committed to delivering this, but there's a few things we need to get resolution on in order to deliver that. So we've got the Paris funding, as I've just mentioned, being able to manage any additional winter pressure costs. I know we've had a big discussion about UEC and some of the challenges there, and again we'll just need to work through what those UEC pressures might do to the finance position, and again getting a final position on the elective recovery fund. What we're really looking for then is all partners, trusts, the ICB to really pull out all the stops between now and the year end. We have got to deliver our financial plan, the plans we agreed, the plans we signed up to, because that will really give us our route into 25-26 once we see that planning guidance and those allocations. The report includes capital. Chair, we've done a lot of work on capital as well. So again, just bringing the board up to date where we're at there. We're underspent year to date. We've worked with all the trust and partners. We believe the forecast now will get us back to where we need to be in terms of capital plans, with the exception of one area around the community diagnostic centres in Wye Valley, which will be under slightly, and we've had conversations with NHS England about that. And then the final bit I just wanted to mention, Simon's report touched on planning guidance, that we haven't had it yet. Likewise, we haven't had the allocations for next year. We are undertaking financial modelling now to try and understand what the short and the medium terms looks like. And again, Finance Committee have been very clear they want to understand that and work through that. So again, a big plea to system partners. We need to look at particularly the medium term and where people's positions are at. Whilst we've got the Building a Sustainable Future, which will help shape what are some of the things we need to redesign, transform to support that. As we go into 25, 26, though, we know we're going to have a significant financial challenge given where we're at the moment. And as we work through those allocations, once they're received, we'll need to come back to the board and consider how we're going to live within our resources and what some of those decisions we will need to take as to how we cut our cloth as we go into next year. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments, Chair, and that's a very quick overview of finance at month 8 and where we're at.
Thanks, Mark. So I think you're signalling we're still forecasting achievement of our plan, but I think there are some increased risks, I guess, at the moment, aren't there? Particularly the UEC pressures adding some risk, and also obviously we haven't caught up on efficiency delivery that we forecast as well. Is that fair reflection on what you've just highlighted to us?
That's fair, Chair. Yes, and also just to flag, the ongoing discussion we're having with NHS England to have with NHS Wales about the powers financial parity.
Some of those outstanding issues that we've indicated we have assumed we're going to resolve, I think, haven't we, in our numbers?
We have.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, please.
Yeah, thanks. I think it picks up on the kind of winter pressures, but also the agency spend, Mark, because I think certainly I can talk for our trust. We're having a look at how we can distinguish out the spend around winter and that pressure rather than the underlying reduction, and particularly around bank and agency, because I think there's a danger that it'll get lost in time, or they'll look at the two separate things. And I don't know whether that applies to the other providers. And that leads us to the other bit we're talking about internally, is a real focus on what's the monthly run rate that we're going to exit at as well. So what we can clearly show is that kind of, if there's an improvement, what's it going to be and how is it going to translate next year as well. So it's just, I think, whether there is that focus in the system, or we need to pick something up slightly separately just to do that, because I think we could get, the story could get lost a little bit.
Absolutely, Stephen. We've asked all partners to have a look, particularly agency and bank, for two things. One, to understand what are some of those short-term pressures linked to winter and some of the things we talked about UEC earlier, but also where we are using bank and potentially agency sometimes to support the elected recovery fund income. So again, if we are incurring costs to support income coming in, we need to be able to distinguish that to understand what is that real run rate. So we've asked partners to look at that, because as we exit and go into next year, we know there'll be a bigger squeeze on agency and temporary staffing, and there'll be a lot more challenge about workforce, particularly linked to productivity and using what we've got differently to avoid those temporary costs.
Okay, any other questions or comments regarding the in-year position, or indeed looking ahead? I mean, I don't know, Rachel, whether you want to come in. I know Mark touched on sort of the modelling work that we're doing, and also there's some, I wasn't sure whether you wanted to pick up at all the sort of discussions at the Finance Committee in the context of this, or separately in the next item.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether to do it now or in the next item, but I'll do it now as you've raised it, Krishni. I think, as Mark rightly says, what we're trying to do is sort of use the system finance committee to add some value across the system and not repeat what you're doing in your finance committees in your organisation. So to that end, what we're trying to focus the agenda on is obviously the in-year work, but also making sure we've got a big enough chunk of time to look at how we develop a medium-term look and a financial framework to support all the things that we've talked about today, really, all the strategies that we're developing. So it's, you know, the shared, you know, the best value care work, you know, the clinical strategies that you're developing. We need to have a real good oversight on what the money looks like over 3 years and how it works on that. So that's what we're trying to focus on and develop a bit more. We had a little bit of a slow start, but I think what I'm sensing from people is that they're very supportive of that approach, and we're trying to marry it, not just a system kind of financial framework, but marry it up with what organisations have as their strategies and their financial plans over 3 years as well. So it's doing something slightly different that will absolutely be complementary to all the work that we've talked about today, and help give you a really clear financial framework around that, which isn't a one-off piece of work, is an ongoing iterative piece of work that we do as a system as a whole, really. So I wanted to highlight that today because we'll continue to pursue that in the finance committee, but if people want to talk about that separately with me or now, very happy to do that, because I think it's different, it's evolving, and it will really support some of the strategic stuff that we've talked about today.
Thanks, Rachel. And I think, you know, certainly the discussion that you and I had, Rachel, was about, you know, making sure that it because it is different, we appreciate that there's some sort of different work involved, and how do we support each other to get that work done, and what do you need from us in terms of support to help drive that forward, because it is important that we get on the front foot as far as we can, so that we're not always dealing with the in-year picture, and I think that's a sort of challenge we set ourselves, and the way that the operating guidance, etc., runs, it tends to focus in year. So really working together to think ahead and get ahead of ourselves, and look for at least a 3-year timescale, I think is what we're keen to do through the committee, aren't we, Rachel? So
yeah,
so really appreciate members' input and support in helping to make that happen, and please tell us, you know, what we need to do to help with that as well. Mark, any final comments, or anyone else want to make any comments before we close on that? Okay, thank you very much. So we do move on. I think we note the financial position, and helpful as well, Mark, to note the obviously the capital position, because I think that was helpful and important to note for this particular meeting, I think. So we move on then to committee escalation and assurance reports. There are some items I know colleagues who chair the committees will have already mentioned, as indeed Rachel just has, but I'm very happy for people to bring out anything that we haven't touched on already today, or that you'd like to reinforce from the committee escalation and assurance reports, because I do think it's important that the board notes the work that's being done in our committees to gain assurance on activity we're undertaking. And of course, some of our system colleagues are involved in those as well. So any comments that anyone would like to highlight from any of the committees? Sarah?
It's just briefly from Strategic Commissioning Committee, just of interest probably for people, because it relates to some of the things we've talked about today. You'll see the report, but I think the Herefordshire Falls Response Service is something that we've often championed and said is a really positive service. And you'll note there that the current provider is not wishing to continue, but we did make an agreement that this was a valuable service, and that is going out for a proper provider selection regime to look for a new provider for that. And I think also, just importantly, as we've mentioned, sort of the success of our general practice, throughout today's meeting. I think it's important just to note the GP out of hours contract that you can see there, that we were looking at how really we felt that getting the operating model for that right going forwards is of absolute underpinning importance to our system, and so we've agreed to extend the current contracts to give us ample time to work with partners and to ensure that we've got the best ongoing and even better primary care across our patch. So they were just two things there. And then, if you'll allow me very briefly, from the Mental Health Collaborative Committee, I think the key focus for all of us is the dementia diagnosis rate recovery plan. We looked at that back in December. Time has passed, but we've got an upcoming committee meeting in February, and it's really to give assurance that we will, as a collaborative, be given real prime focus to the updates we get relating to that topic. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Vicky?
I think just triangulating nicely with Sarah's last point, we had 3 areas that were escalated to QRD. 2 of those we've already discussed. Mary's just discussed the children's CYP, and obviously urgent care we covered before. But the dementia diagnosis continues to be reported to QRD, whilst, as Sarah said quite rightly, the Mental Health Joint Committee will review that in detail. So those are the 3 areas that QDOS had supported us by escalating, and we spent time and discussion on. So thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Emma?
Yeah, just a couple of things from me. Just to, I know we've reported previously we've had challenges with external audit and being able to meet our deadline, so I just wanted to kind of assure everyone that we're going to be on track this year. So I think that's really good news. And just the other thing is to say that there is some work happening in developing a system-wide approach to risk management, and I think that will benefit the system and particularly the residents in Herefordshire and Worcestershire in the longer term. So as that work develops, we can report back on that too.
Great, thanks, Emma. David?
Thanks, Krishni. Yeah, this one is more about ICB internal work, but the Appointments and Remuneration Committee have reviewed the succession plan for each of the VSM positions, focusing not only succession but also development of candidates, and there were no immediate risks identified to the committee, which was good news. And we're also extending this further down into the band 8s, looking particularly at potential for succession through. So we're doing that longer term work to make sure we do have the capacity and capability within the ICB going forward.
Thanks, David. And finally, Simon?
Not to be left out, the Operational Executive Committee that I chair, the point I would highlight probably is we had a really good update on the equality, diversity and inclusion work, and as part of that, quite a detailed review of where we've got to with the freedom to speak up work, which actually, certainly within the ICB, has been quite promising over the course of the year, quite active, and one of the focuses of that in the coming weeks is to try and build a bit of more of a network across the system of the freedom to speak up work. But again, largely very positive and very pleased and grateful for the work people are doing in those areas.
Thank you, Simon. Are there any questions on any other points referenced in the report that are available to colleagues? No, okay, thank you. So we will note those, and thanks very much for the update. So our final paper is the Board Assurance Framework Report. I imagine a lot of the risks that are there have been touched on through the course of the meeting, which Hannah always likes to emphasise, because that's the usefulness of the BAF. But Hannah, is there anything you want to particularly bring to our attention?
Thank you, Krishna. Yes, thank you for introduction as well. So the only thing really I wanted to highlight is that additional bit of work that we've done this time round with regards to the Board Assurance Framework Report, which is having a look at, given where we are now in the business year, so we've got 2.5 months to go. So we had a look at all our priorities and risks and we did kind of an estimation where we believe we will end up by the end of March in terms of our assurance rating and achievement of our priorities. So that is added to each of the priorities, as you will see throughout the report, and then on pages 12 and 13 there's a summary of that, showing that we will have achieved hopefully the target rating for about 50% of our priorities set, and three priorities will receive limited assurance. Again, like you said, Christian, at the start, we talked about those topics, and they are well rehearsed throughout our board meetings. And the final section of the report just highlights any changes made to our risks, and this time it's positive news. They have a number of risks have either been closed or reduced in score. So I'll stop there, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Hannah. Any questions for Hannah? Okay, so important report. I think important piece of work to update it and refresh it, Hannah, in anticipation of the year end. And I think you are looking for us to just note that and obviously gain assurance about the work that's being undertaken. So thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our public business. I do apologise that we've overrun by 10 minutes, but I think it was worthwhile to discuss some of the kind of challenges that we've experienced, and it was important that we reflected that in our meeting. So I thank members of the public who may have been observing our meeting, and obviously contributions from board members. I am conscious that we do have a confidential meeting today, which is unusual for us. It is relating to a procurement matter. Are board members content to join that meeting immediately, so we can conclude that quickly rather than at the time that might be designated? So if that's okay, we will close this meeting and join the confidential link. We do, I think, need members to join because I think there is an approval required, Hannah, if I'm right, so we do need to be quorate. So I will see you there shortly. Thank you, everybody, and I'll close this meeting now.